I'm just rolling everywhere here. Rolling. I just realized that's a reel-to-reel tape term. Rolling, you know?
Well, we do the same thing. Like, hey, thanks for tuning into my podcast today. I mean, they didn't tune in, but I still find that that's like the best way to explain what they've done. Thanks for pushing play today. I mean, it doesn't sound the same.
Thanks for tapping your finger on the screen today.
Yeah, it just sounds weird.
It does. Well, this is the Podcast Engineering Show, and it is session number 7. And I just realized last session, I think I called it episode 6. So I'm trying to use the word session here because recording session. This is a recording show. It's an audio show. And it's not really, well, anyway, you get the idea. And here's my in-house band. Hit it! If I ever have like a late night TV show with a band, I'm going to have to get these guys to come and play this song. So anyway, welcome to the show, the Podcast Engineering Show. I'm Chris Curran. I produce podcasts for Dun & Bradstreet, the Forbes Podcast Network. I'm finally able to announce that. And also select business authors and companies. Every week on this show, we bring you podcast production techniques on a silver platter. We get down and dirty and we talk shop with podcast producers, engineers, and other specialists. I have a background in audio engineering in the music business, and since entering podcasting about 4 years ago, I've noticed a huge lack of audio skills in podcasting, and that's where this show can help. If you implement the best of what you learn here, your podcast will sound a lot better and you'll spend less time producing them. Of course, I have Barry with me here in studio. And I want to ask Barry, what do you need to really produce and engineer a podcast that sounds really good?
You're going to need a couple of horses or a couple of mules.
There you go. That's what you're going to need. And, you know,
yeah, oh yeah.
Barry is just here with me. It's great. This show is brought to you by 2 companies that I'm involved with. One is the Podcast Engineering School. It's brand new. It's not even 100% up and running. But if you want to learn how to launch a podcast, you want to gain audio engineering skills, or if you want to actually learn how to make podcasting a career, the school can teach you. podcastengineeringschool.com. And, of course, my production company, Fractal Recording, providing podcast production at the highest quality to companies, authors, and podcast networks. It's fractalrecording.com. And Darrell Darnell is our guest. But, Darrell, your company is called Golden Spiral Media, and fractals are sometimes golden spirals. Isn't that pretty cool?
Yeah, that's a nice little tie-in there.
Are you into all like geometry and sacred geometry and anything like that, or all that stuff?
Not at all, no.
Oh, really? How did you pick the name Golden Spiral Media?
Well, the first podcast that we ever did before we were Golden Spiral Media we were just called the Fringe Podcast, and we were podcasting about the TV show Fringe.
Yes.
And the Golden Spiral was something that they incorporated into their marketing even before the show launched, and it played pretty heavily on a few episodes, particularly the final season. And so by the time the final season rolled around, we were already Golden Spiral Media. We had branched out into other podcasts, but we chose Golden Spiral Media as a way to pay homage to how we got our start in podcasting and point back to Fringe.
That's so interesting. My wife and I watched the first 4 seasons of Fringe. We didn't watch the 5th one, but we're going to have to finish it up. I know.
What?
No, look, there's a story here. It was a business breakup. The guy who I was supposedly partnering with screwed me royally, and he had lent me the 5 seasons on DVD. So like we had finished season 4, and I just had to give it back to him because we were parting ways and, you know, never to speak again. And anyway.
It's on Hulu, not on Hulu. It's on Amazon and on Netflix, so you can go enjoy that 5th season. It's great.
All right, but not to get too much into Fringe, but Darrell, you are speaking at Podcast Movement this year, as I am, so congratulations on that. You began podcasting that Fringe podcast in 2008. You formed Golden Spiral Media, which is now a large podcasting network with more than 24 podcasts. And in 2014, which is a couple years ago, you established Pro Podcast Solutions to help podcasters produce better podcasts. So officially, we welcome you to the Podcast Engineering Show.
Thank you, man. It's exciting to be here. You got a great show.
Right? Yeah, I know. The first episode was off the hook with Blake and Mary. I don't know if you heard that one.
I did. A portion of it. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. I mean, when she started talking about, well, I don't even want to repeat what she said. Jeez. My friend emailed me, though. He's like, her bra? Just with a question mark. That was the subject of an email. I was like, oh my God.
Hey, but we have an expression, and I'm sure you've used it yourself. Mike's on, pants off. And if she wants to go Mike on, bra off, more power to her.
Oh, that is brilliant. That should be the name of a podcast show.
Yeah.
Oh my God. So you know the agenda, Mr. or Mrs. Listener. We start with the speed round because we don't want to get too much into the crazy background all at once. So let's do the speed round. Tell me about the actual shows that you host and produce right now. So I know you're probably producing a lot of the shows that are on your network, and we can maybe talk about some of that later, but I want to know now, like for you personally, Darrell, what shows are you hosting and producing yourself, like recording, editing, mixing, all that?
Well, the ones that I'm producing that I'm also hosting right now is a show called Stuff I Learned Yesterday that's on our Golden Spiral Media Network. It's a little bit of an oddball, the only one that's not based on a TV or film project, and it's just taking life lessons from everyday situations. I host the Monday and Friday show of that. It's a 5-day-a-week, 15-minute or less show. But I'm producing most of those. Some of the folks are able to kind of edit and produce their own shows, but I do most of those. And I am about to restart the Person of Interest podcast now that CBS has finally given us a time frame for the final season. What will be the final season of that? So those are the ones that I am currently hosting. I just wrapped up the X-Files podcast called We Still Believe, and which was a ton of fun. Oh, wow. So Person of Interest is a TV show. That's right. Okay. And see, I like that. I like the idea of podcasting about TV shows and well, not really movies, but I guess people do have like, what was that movie, the movie series? Jennifer Lawrence was in it. Oh, The Hunger Games. The Hunger Games, yeah. People, yeah. Yeah. And we've got some film podcasts, but they take a specific approach. Like we have one that's specifically about horror podcasts, or horror movies rather, and I do produce that one. It's called Fright Club, and but I don't host it. And then we have another one called Triple Cast, which looks at 3 movies that have something in common, maybe a common director or a common actor, or based off books from the same author, or maybe even have the same score, the composer. So anyway, that one's called Triple Cast, and I started that one, but I don't host it anymore. I handed it off to a couple of guys who know more about movies than I do. Okay, and you said horror, right? Yeah. It almost sounded like another word. Sorry if I didn't enunciate. Which is like, hey now, I'm going to get another email. That doesn't line up with our network at all. All right. So let's take Stuff I Learned Yesterday. Okay. You said you're doing the Monday and Friday show. Yep. Again, this is the second question of the quote unquote speed round, which I know me calling it the speed round is going to be short lived because whatever. So tell me about the production, the workflow, and the equipment you're using. Start from 30 minutes before you're about to record an episode and just overview the process of recording and mixing and editing right up to publishing. Yeah, and Stuff I Learned Yesterday is a little bit different from the rest of the stuff that we do because it is a single host podcast. It's the only one we have on our network that is a single host podcast. Okay. And we're also drawing from real life stories of each host. So for me, my process begins weeks in advance normally, where I'm just trying to, when I have an idea of a topic I want to discuss, I'll put it into a list. So when it comes showtime or time to record, what I'll do is I'll look at that list earlier in the week and figure out which episode or which topic I want to talk about. Right. And then when the time comes to work on the episode, I will pretty much type out what I'm going to say. And again, this is pretty rare. The rest of our stuff just goes off the cuff or off of a loose outline. Mm-hmm. This one, I want to craft a story. And so I'm typing out and just kind of writing out the story, how I want it to go. And I tell the story, and then I break down what I learned from that story. And then when it comes time to record, I am a guy that loves hardware. I have a Electro Voice RE320 that I record into. I've got a Soundcraft EPM6 mixer that I use, and that goes into a Zoom H5 audio recorder. So everything's hardware. And then I will pull the audio file from that and throw it into Adobe Audition, where I have a template set up where it has all of my preset things that I like for my own voice, my multiband compressor, or those are the things that I like for my voice.
Right.
It has all the musical elements already in there. A little bit of editing needs to be done because I do stumble over my words, or I want to change the way I said something. And so I edit it, and then it goes up to the cloud up there in Libsyn.
Right. Oh, Libsyn, cool. All right, so that's cool. Right, so that's just like you're recording like a monologue and then editing it and then adding the music and all that. By the way, are you using a gate on your voice right now?
I sure am. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, it's slightly catching a little bit, like it's cutting off a tiny bit when you start speaking. So you bring the threshold down just like a little. It's so gates are so touchy. I mean, my God, if I had a nickel for every time in the studio when I sat there for an hour trying to gate a snare drum or a kick drum perfectly, oh my God, it's crazy. It's nuts. But it does sound good. It does sound good on you. So that's the workflow. Now, I know you're a hardware guy because at Podfest, you had a whole table of mics and hardware, and then we were out in the hall with Mark Johansson, who had the whole setup. Yeah. That was pretty cool. So I'm going to get into the background of that, how that works. But for your other podcast, The Person of Interest, is that a similar setup, or do you do interviews and have to incorporate other people with that one?
Sometimes we'll do an interview and we'll connect however the person we're interviewing wants to connect. Because we're doing the TV and film genre, a lot of times if we're doing an interview, it's with an actor or with a producer or someone connected that way. And their schedule, they may be going anywhere. And so sometimes we're on cell phones, sometimes we're on Skype or what have you. So we have the ability to bring in regardless of how they need to connect. But most of the time it's just me and a co-host. And traditionally, we have connected via like a Google Hangout so that people can watch us do the show live, and we'll interact with people that way. That's also something that we've almost always done from the very, very beginning of the Fringe podcast. But since Blab has come out, we've just been doing Blabs. They're so easy both to connect to and to have interaction with. So, but we'll do a double ender. So he's recording his side of the call, and I'm recording my side. And so in post-production, we can just put those together, and it sounds like we're in the same room, even though he's in Atlanta and I'm in Oklahoma City.
Right, that is cool. So Blab, yeah, I've actually watched some Blabs, but I haven't been on a Blab. It seems really handy and really cool. I tried to do a webinar type thing on Google Hangouts a week and a half ago, and it was just the biggest failure ever. Actually, by the time this comes out, it'll be a month ago. But
yeah, I'm not a big fan of Google Hangout. It's really awkward and clunky, but it was kind of the best we could do at the time. But Blab has made it so much easier, and we're just using it for the live component. We're not using it for the audio quality or even the video quality. So for us, it's a great component for that.
Right. Yeah, I've thought about adding video, but adding video just adds this whole other dimension of camera, lighting, bandwidth, editing.
Yep. All those. Yep.
And for me, I don't know. It's not in my wheelhouse. So any video editing I've ever done, it just seems to take forever, and I don't even know if I'm doing it right or if or if it comes out clear, or I don't know. So audio is much easier. Well, I guess, but that's my background. So for me, it should be easier. So now all the other shows on your network, by the way, is it called the Golden Spiral Network?
Golden Spiral Media Network.
A Golden Spiral Media Network. And what's the website for that?
goldenspiralmedia.com.
Okay, cool. And all your shows and everything is there, right?
That's right. Yeah, we have, I don't know how many we have current, because as TV shows come and go, so do our podcasts.
Okay.
So yeah, but we specialize in genre TV. So sci-fi or comic book stuff like Supergirl or Arrow, Flash, that sort of thing. Or if it's sci-fi, we're probably going to have a show. There's so much out there now. We don't have a show for everything, but we've got quite a bit.
Right. That's awesome. And now, so the other shows on your network, are you doing any of the production for them?
Just a couple. I mentioned Fright Club that I do the production for, and I did our Doctor Who show last season, even though I wasn't hosting it, and that's about it. So what I've done is I've created training resources for all of our hosts, and so if you're going to be a host on our network, then there are requirements in terms of the audio quality that you can deliver and the type of post-production that you can do in terms of both editing and creating blog posts. And so the hosts, usually one of them will take care of the online stuff, and the other host will take care of the recording and the editing of that. Although we try to get them to do double enders when they can. So that's the way it works. Most of the hosts will take care of the editing themselves.
So as far as your own production and engineering of your shows, what do you think is your greatest strength in that area?
I think just the knowledge I've acquired over the last 8 years. When we started out, if you go back and listen to some of our early podcasts, we sounded terrible. It was the best we could do at the time. In fact, Ray Ortega, I was at New Media Expo a couple of years ago, and he was on a panel, and he was talking about this Fringe podcast. I had no idea he was even a Fringe fan, and he was talking about how they interviewed this actress and how terrible the audio quality was, and here they had this big thing, and I was like, he's talking about me. And he totally was. I hit him up in the hallway later, and I was like, I'm pretty sure you were talking about me. And he's like, no, man, there were other Fringe podcasts. I'm like, no, let me tell you. And he's like, oh, yeah, that was you I was talking about. But he was right. We struggled so much, and there were so many things behind the scenes that went wrong that day, even though we had tested and tested and tested. But that's the way it goes sometimes. But so to get to your question, my strength is just all the mistakes that I've made over the last 8 years, and the technology has come a long way. So I've learned a lot over the last several years on how to record in different environments, with different budgets, with different levels of technical experience, and troubleshooting various types of things that can happen or go wrong when you're trying to hit that record button.
Yeah, there are a lot of moving parts. So what is your background in audio? Why did you do you have a background in audio, and or if not, how did you get into podcasting?
Yeah, I've always been interested in those sorts of things, and I've been technical. I mean, I can remember as a kid, I had one of those tape decks, and I would just record my voice and talk and then play it back. But that was it. I didn't do a show. It was just listening to my own voice talk, which seems narcissistic, but it wasn't. It was just, I was curious on how things recorded and how things sounded differently.
Sure.
But really, I didn't do a whole lot. I was in a vocal group just out of high school, and we traveled almost every weekend. And so we had to set up and tear down equipment each week. And so that was my first exposure into setting up equipment, but I didn't do any mixing really. That came when I started doing stuff at church. I got onto the audio video team at church and had a guy who had been doing it for years, and he trained me and helped me understand how a board works and all that stuff. So I had that background when I started podcasting, but a lot of it just came learning as you go on the podcast, and that we eventually got to a point where people were reaching out to us going, hey, you sound great, and I'm thinking about starting a podcast, or I want to improve my audio quality. How did you do it? Can you help me figure out how to sound good like you guys do? And it took a long time to get to that point. Like I said, our sound was pretty terrible at first, but so that's kind of how it progressed over the years into 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago now. Gosh, it'll be 3 years from the time this comes out, just a few weeks away. Right. May the 3rd was my last day at my corporate job, and in 2013, where I left there to do podcast consulting and audio production full time.
And when you first set up, and you're saying now that your sound wasn't the best and you weren't exactly 100% happy with it, you have a different hardware setup now than you had back then?
Somewhat. We have better equipment. I was using a mixer that a buddy of mine had sitting in his garage for who knows how long.
Cool. And
I grabbed a bunch of mics from him too, or I bought them from him. It was just a whole bunch of stuff that he had. He's like, you can have it all for $100. And
awesome.
I mean, like some of the mics, there was like a kick drum mic in there that looked like it had been used as a drum. It was, the grill was all bashed in. But so the equipment we started with wasn't great. The mixer died about, 2 or 3 months into our setup, and we had to get another one. and I got a Behringer, which I would never recommend again, but it lasted a year, and then I finally, did some research, and that's why I use a Soundcraft mixer now. So our audio quality has improved because we've started using better equipment, although technology has come a long way since then too. I mean, you can sound great with an ATR 2100 microphone, and that's it nowadays. So that didn't exist back then. And, also things like the compressor limiter gate that really helped really isolate some of the background noise and things that we were dealing with. And then learning more about software and how to clean up production audio files in post-production. So a lot of things kind of work together to improve our audio quality over the years.
So let's work through your signal chain. You have your mic, you said it's an RE320, right?
Right, yep.
Which I kind of want to try that. Well, wait, we had one at PodFest, I think.
We did. That's the one that's in my studio now. I bought it from Mark.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Wait, so what were you using before that?
A Heil PR40.
Oh, a Heil PR40. Oh, okay. So, all right. So you got the mic, and in fact, Mark was talking about getting a vintage RE20 from somewhere, and I actually want to talk to him about that because I really want to try an RE20, but a vintage one. Or your RE320 sounds really good, and even on location there at PodFest when we were doing the sound test between all the mics, it did sound really good. Right now I use a Shure SM7B, and I like it.
Oh yeah, those are great. Yeah,
I like it. It's good. Of course, and I have it going through the big boy, the Neve Portico 2, which is really expensive mic pre and compressor and EQ. So let's go through your signal chain. You got the RE320, which sounds good. That plugs directly into your Soundcraft board?
That's right. I got the Soundcraft EPM6 as my mixer. From there, I'm sending the signal out to a DBX 166XL, which is a compressor limiter gate.
Oh, I like the DBX.
Then from there...
Yeah, hold on a second. We got to talk about the DBX.
Okay. So I love DBX. Yes.
It's coming out of an insert, right? And going back in?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you have so it's a compressor limiter expander. Yeah, so I like the DBX units as well. They're fairly cheap. They sound pretty good, really good, I'd say, for the money. And one other thing that DBX has, for instance, I have the 166XS, which is a compressor limiter gate, which I don't use the gate at all, by the way.
Okay.
I never use gating to tape. But I use the compressor and limiter. And the best part about the compressor that I like, and this really helped me when I had my physical studio in New Jersey for 3 years, because I'd have people coming in, and, when people come in, some people talk close to the mic, some people when they lean back. And so it really helps to use a compressor. And the other thing is, too, that if someone leans in real close, you don't want it to blow out the mic pre and just, distort when it's recording. So the compressor really helps catch those peaks and bring it down. But the DBX have these two buttons. Yours probably does too. One is called over easy, which is about the threshold and between the threshold and the ratio. And it kind of automatically sets the ratio, which is kind of cool. And then the other one is an auto button, which automatically sets the attack and release depending on the actual signal, whatever, the content, the signal, whatever. And those two buttons, over easy and auto, it does make it so easy to set the compressor. One of the difficulties of setting a compressor is the attack and the release and the threshold and all that. So those two buttons, do you use those two buttons on yours?
Well, I don't have the over easy button. I've got the older model. They don't make my model anymore. So that might be something that they've added since they created my model. But I do have the auto button. And that was the primary reason we got the compressor limiter gate into our chain. And we started out with the Behringer. I don't remember what their compressor limiter gate is called. And it, like every other piece of Behringer equipment I've ever had, died within a year, which is why I don't give them any of my money anymore.
Right. We had a previous guest,
all
Behringer equipment. She swears by Behringer.
And I know other people do, and other people have been using it for years with no problem, but I've never had a piece of equipment from Behringer last longer than a year. And so I could go off on a tangent on them.
Right.
I won't, but
Yeah,
but I do love DBX, and we had we used to do everything in studio. When we did Fringe, it was me and Clint, and we were in studio together. And Clint's voice is so much louder and sharper than mine is, and we were really having a challenge. He would, like you said, you hit that mic hard, you zoom, you lean in on your chair, and boom, you've overblown the amps
Everything.
or the diaphragm on the mic, and so we were just really having some control issues, and the compressor limiter gate just really, that was the one thing that we added to our chain that took us to the next level. It was a stark change in our audio quality when we added that.
Right, so then it goes back, so it comes through an insert into your DBX, and then it comes back to the board. Do you do any EQing on the board?
A little bit of EQing, just to try to get the most neutral sound out of each voice, because each voice has different tonal qualities, whether you're, even for women and men especially, are going to be different for obvious reasons. And so I do a little bit of EQing. So I've got a 6-channel mixer. So each person that might come into my studio has their own channel that I've preset. If someone new comes in, then we'll set them up.
Got it.
But most of the EQing will take place in software.
So people in studio. So tell me about your studio real quick. Do you have several mics set up just ready to go for people to walk in and be on your show?
They could be. We have 2 bays because we set this thing up where Clint and I were doing our show each week. And he's not doing anything currently on our show. So most of his stuff is remote. We've had, I think we've had 4 people recording at one time in this studio. In our previous, when we first started, we had 4 every week, but only 3 in the same room. One guy was Skyping in every week, but I could do up to 6 in my studio if I needed to. But we have 2 permanent bays that are set up at any given time. The other one's got a high LPR 40 on it, and then of course I already said I'm using the RA320.
Nice. And then you come out of your mixer and you go straight into your, what did you say? It's a DR? No,
it's the Zoom H5.
Zoom H5.
Yep. And so that's how I'm recording. Now, if I'm sending, like right now, I'm sending my audio through my computer to you. And so I have a Focusrite. It's the Scarlett 2i2.
Yes.
The audio interface that I'm using to bring sound from my mixer into my computer.
Right. Yeah, I have 3 of those and I love them.
They're great.
Do. Yeah.
They're so good.
Yeah. The mic pre's are just cleaner than average for sure. And Focusrite is a big name in, I learned about Focusrite and Neve stuff in the music studios because they make really high end gear that's just awesome. When I saw that they made audio interfaces, I love it. In fact, for my main computer, I have a Scarlett. I'm looking at it. It's an 18i20, and it actually has 8 XLR inputs, and I can record 8 tracks at the same time. It's very cool.
Yeah, they're so good. And I added it to my chain probably 6 or 8 months ago because I had some clients that were using it, and I needed to have one on hand for troubleshooting. And I thought, well, if I'm going to have this on hand, I might as well make it my audio interface. And I had been using like an iMic, and I've used some of the other types of USB, just real kind of the dongle style.
Right.
And it seemed like I was blowing through those because, part of the problem I probably have, the reason I go through equipment is because my equipment's on 15 hours a day, 5 or 6 days a week. Although my Soundcraft mixer I've had for years, my DBX I've had for years. I haven't had any trouble with those.
Right.
But anyway, I had been blowing through a USB dongle about every year to 18 months, and so now I haven't had the Focusrite even a year yet, so I can't say that it's fair there, but I've loved it. The preamps are great, and it gives me more control than what I had before.
Right. Now talk to me about the Zoom H5, because the only experience I have with the Zoom portable digital recorder is these guys here locally in Colorado Springs. I helped them finalize their setup and launch their podcast. And I think he bought an H4, and we were trying to go from the board into an H4, and the level was just like, apparently the inputs didn't accept line level inputs. It was just mic. And so it just was blowing out. I mean, it was just the most distortion I've ever heard. And so we didn't know how to get the level down, because when you turn the level down on the H4, it still was distorted, but then at a certain point, it just went away when you turn it down enough. So anyway, that's weird. But tell me about your H5, how that works.
I love the H5, and I don't have a lot of experience with the H4, so I can't give you personal comparisons, but some of my friends like Daniel J. Lewis, he used the H4 forever. And I don't know what his experience with the H5 is, but he and I have had some conversations where we've compared the two as far as our experience with each one. And it seems like the H5 is superior in every way, as it should be. I mean, it is their newer model. It did, even though they still produced the H4, they lowered the price and kept it on the market. In my opinion, it's worth it to spend a few extra bucks and get the H5. It has two built-in XLR inputs, which can also take like a quarter inch if you want to pipe in an instrument or bring a line in like you were just talking about.
Right.
Both of those preamps are really clean, and they're powerful. I can pump a high LPR 40 into it, so it's strong enough preamp to deliver a high LPR 40, which is known for being a gain hog. And it will do it cleanly. So that's great. So you have two of those, two XLR / insert jacks, or input jacks, excuse me, not insert. There is a difference.
Right.
And it also has where you can bring in, say, a 3.5 millimeter input from either your iPhone, or if you like, you're running a soundboard. Obviously, that's how Barry's joining us today, I'm pretty sure. And
yeah,
there he is. So you could bring that in, or that's how I'm actually bringing audio in from my mixer. Although I could do the XLRs that way too. So, and that's clean. And all three of those have their own levels, their own gain knobs for each of those three inputs. Has a built-in XY microphone capsule. The cool thing about the Zoom H5 that Zoom has done with their latest generation of gadgetry, whether it's the H5 or the H6 or the Q8 or what have you, are these interchangeable capsules. And so it comes built in with this XY capsule, but it's removable. And they have two different styles of shotgun microphones I can throw on there. They've got a mid-side microphone capsule. If I need more XLRs, they have a capsule that will add two more XLRs to the recorder, or they have another different style of XY that has a different pattern. It'll go from a 90 to 180 degree pattern, where the one I have is locked into a 90 degree pickup pattern. So a lot of flexibility with these types of recorders that Zoom's putting out nowadays.
So when you have the capsule that adds two more XLR inputs, is the H5 able to record all four inputs separately?
Yes, it is.
So it's like a little 4-track recorder.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. And the two that are built in, they also have phantom power. You can do them at 12, 24, 48 volts. And so you can run condenser microphones into the two built-in XLRs.
Right.
If you do add the capsule that adds two more, you're only going to be able to run dynamic microphones. It doesn't send phantom power to those. That's the only restriction. But they're clean, and yeah, you can isolate each track separately and do a 4-track recorder with it.
That's pretty cool. That's very handy. Also, I heard my friend told me that, I don't know if it's an H6 or if it's the H5, but he said you can actually record at your normal level, but then it'll record like a safety copy 6 dB lower.
That's right. Yeah, both of them do that. It'll do a backup copy for you. And I do that a lot. Because I had an issue once where my primary recording, there was an issue with it. And so I thought, you know what? I'll just turn off on the backup feature is what that's called.
Okay.
And so I do that by default now. I think I've only had to pull it once, but out of the hundreds and hundreds of recordings that I've done. But it's a nice feature especially if you're in a situation where you're not sure if the dB level is going to be controlled all the way through. It's a nice safety feature.
Yeah, it really gives you a little peace of mind that, okay, even if I'm recording something and somebody just gets right on a mic and screams or something, and the main recording gets distorted, And it doesn't have to be someone screaming. It could be another loud noise. But
Sure.
if you have that 6 dB lower backup, hopefully that didn't distort as well. Then you can just, edit in that little piece that's clean. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So let's talk editing. Now, you mentioned Adobe Audition, right? That's what you use?
That is what I use. Yeah.
I have a question.
Okay.
I have a question about, before I forget, I have a question about Adobe Audition. I know you can do multi-track in Audition.
Yep.
Now, are you able to, for instance, let's say I have 8 tracks and they're all 8 tracks on the screen. Okay, I could see all 8. And I want to, let's say there's an awkward pause and it's like 5 seconds and I want to take out 3 of those seconds and just make the awkward pause or make the pause only 2 seconds. Do you have to edit each track separately, take out 3 seconds and move it to the left? Or is there some overall function in Audition that you can literally remove 3 seconds and just move all the clips over automatically?
Yeah, you can do it both ways. And so the way you can do all tracks at the same time is just a ripple delete all tracks. And so the Audition has quite a few different ways that you can handle that situation. You can, and if you use shortcut keys, which I recommend because it's so much faster to edit using shortcut keys, there's a shortcut key that would allow you to delete just one track and snap them together. You could delete one track and leave the gap. You could delete all tracks and leave the gap, or you could delete all tracks and snap them together.
So you would just highlight those 3 seconds on like the main time bar or whatever, and then just say delete all tracks and snap all tracks.
Yep, that's right.
Okay. I'm wondering if Reaper can do that as well, because I actually record into Reaper.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with Reaper. I've never used it. I know people that do use it, but I'm not one of those guys, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably not the best multi-track DAW, but it has a very light footprint on the CPU, and it is easy to use. So, and for podcasting, it's good. If I was mixing a record, I probably wouldn't use it.
Well, and that's the thing with podcasters. Most of the types of editing that we're doing are pretty simple types. You're not needing the full set of tools that an audio engineer would need who's producing a record, just like you mentioned. I mean, and that's why I started out doing Audacity, and I even built my business on Audacity, and with great results. I mean, when people were emailing me going, "How do I sound like you?" I was doing everything with Audacity, and I know people are down on Audacity because it's free and it's cheap, or it's not this or the other. People just need to give Audacity a break. It's a great piece of software. You can sound like a professional with it, and it doesn't have all the bells and whistles that some of the other things have. But for podcasters, you don't need a lot of those other bells and whistles. Now, don't get me wrong, I do prefer Audition, but I'm not one of those guys that will bag on Audacity. I think it's a great piece of software.
It is, and it goes back to, I think I might be saying this every episode. The tool is important to some extent, but the way you use it is really the most important thing by far, by like 95 to 5% easily. You know what I mean?
Yep, I agree.
Like your skill as an audio engineer, that's the most important thing, period. Like me, I always say, you could put me in any studio, anywhere in the world, any equipment, and I know what to do. I'll make it sound good.
Yep.
So it's just fundamentals and experience. So the reason I asked that question about editing all the tracks in Audition, do you do all your editing while it's still like 2 tracks or multi-track, or do you actually, mix it down to stereo and then edit the stereo file?
No, I mix it down last. That's the last thing that I do. I want to have everything as broken apart as possible. If a lot of the tracks that I'll get in from my clients will have, say, the host on the left channel and the guest on the right channel, and I'll break those down into 2 separate mono files so that I can apply different effects to them independently of the other, and then mix it down when I'm all said and done.
Okay, and what's your general philosophy on editing? I know you mentioned earlier that you do, tighten up your episodes and everything. Do you have a general philosophy or anything you always do or never do?
Well, for Pro Podcast Solutions, we have two different styles of editing that we offer, and so most clients are pretty satisfied with one or the other. And so we call it streamline editing, and with that, we're not doing a lot of cleanup of the ums and ahs. Either they don't have a lot of that, or they don't mind leaving that in. They want the all natural type of feel to
Right.
it. They just want to be. They just, whatever I am, that's what I am. I just want to be authentic or whatever. Or they don't have a lot, like I said.
Right.
And so we're cleaning up any type of where they said, let me rephrase that, or there was a long pause where they were thinking of the answer, just trying to really clean up and make it flow smoothly. And then, of course, we're adding in all the audio elements. And we're still doing noise reduction and compression and polishing and all those sorts of things. But then we offer a full line of editing, so if they have an episode that's got Skype glitches in there because Skype is Skype, or they do have a lot of ums and they want those cleaned up, or sometimes, and I'm guilty of this, I'll stumble over my words just like that, you know. We all do that, or I just said, that's a crutch phrase, and so they may want that cleaned out.
Right.
So that's the type of thing we would do with our pro level editing, and so for our clients, it's up to them. Now, for me personally, if I'm editing, say, the Person of Interest podcast, I used to be really, really particular about that stuff. And that's why I got as good at editing audio as I am, because it was like, man, I don't want to look like an idiot. I'm from Oklahoma. People think we're backwoods. I got to put myself out there in the most professional way. Everything's got to be perfect. But now I'm just like, you know what? If we're doing an and it's prolonged, we'll clean that out. I do still want the flow to be good, but I'm just going to let it flow a little bit more than I used to. And part of it's because I've gotten better at speaking over the last 8 years than I was, when I began. But my philosophy, my personal philosophy on my own podcast has also changed. I'm not as big of a stickler about it as I used to be. I want it to be good. I want it to be professional, but I want it to flow and so I kind of have a blending of the two philosophies there.
Part of that is probably you just knowing what is awkward, what needs to be cut, and what isn't really a big deal, and what you can leave. Like, I think the discrimination in your mind has probably improved over time as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's experience. So what kind of monitors do you use? Do you mix and edit on headphones, or do you have speakers, or?
I mix and edit on headphones. I'm not a monitor person. I don't really feel like for podcasting, editing off of monitors is necessary. And there are times of the day, if the kids are home and playing and that sort of thing, that it would be hard for me to hear the details of the audio if I wasn't wearing headphones. Right. So I definitely use headphones. Now, I use a headphone that I don't think is being made anymore. It's by Skull Candy, which I'm not a huge fan of Skull Candy. These are their Aviator brand or Aviator style. I found them because I was looking for some headphones that were over-the-ear headphones that were comfortable, that I could wear for 12 hours plus a day on those days when I do that, which is most every day. And I also needed them to be tonally neutral. I didn't want them to be heavy on the bass. I wanted to hear a natural sound. And so many headphones that are out there have extra drivers and the low frequencies, or they'll emphasize bass, and that's great for music, but that's not great for audio editing, especially for spoken voice. So I found them to be really neutral and deliver just an accurate sound. And so those are the ones that I use. If I were buying new headphones today, I'm not sure what I would buy. I would have to do a lot of research. For what's important for me also is the type of cup that's going around the ear. These are like a faux leather, but they're not like a vinyl. They don't fleck off. They're oils of the skin doesn't break them down over time, where so many of those, they're really soft, but then that's got that kind of fake vinyl-y that starts to flake off and flake apart over time. And these don't do that. And so when the next pair of headphones I get will have to be like these in that regard too, because I don't want to have to go check myself in the mirror for black flecks on my face every time I finish, editing.
Plus, once it flakes, it rubs against your ear. It almost hurts. It's like,
yeah, it's just not a good experience in any way. And a lot of people recommend those Sonys, and they do the same thing. They start to fleck off, and I don't go for that.
right? I use the AKG, the gold ones, like the K240s. Yeah, they're good.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good one.
I forgot to ask you, what resolution do you record at with your H5?
Oh, I am doing a 44.1 kilohertz and wave. I'm not sure if I'm at 16-bit or 32. Probably at 16-bit.
Or 20, probably 20, 16 or 24. Or does it also offer 32?
Yeah, that's a good question.
So it's probably 16, yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's 16, though.
Okay, cool. And then, so you're editing and you're finalizing everything before you mix it down. What kind of mastering do you do? Do you add like a multi-band compressor across the whole thing or a limiter?
Sometimes I will do a limiter on the whole thing. In fact, oftentimes I will. I won't do a multi-band compressor on the whole thing. I do that on the voice level or on the individual track level. And a lot of that's because of the music. Music needs to sound like music. It doesn't need to be overly compressed, and it's already been mastered. So I will run those on individual tracks. If I run a limiter, if I do anything on the whole master track, it's going to be a limiter and nothing else.
Okay. And how much limiting are you comfortable with?
It depends.
Okay.
I used to be one of those guys that would be just shy of 0 dB, and I've come full circle away from that. And I did that because of someone who taught me some of my audio editing stuff years and years ago. We sometimes we'll mix down to negative 16 LUFS, which is kind of trying to be a standard in the podcasting community. That will depend on if our clients really want that or not. Even though we do advertise that on our website, we don't always do that because some of them don't want that. Some of them want like a -5 or even a -3, but that's about, sometimes we'll push it to -2, but that's really as loud as we'll ever go. And even that, I think that's too loud, but sometimes we will, if that's what they want.
Wow. Not -2 LUFS.
No, dB.
dB. Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
That's interesting. Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I'm sure sometimes when you record you don't do many Skype calls. So when you do a Skype call, which is, I guess, rare for you, and the audio doesn't sound so good, how do you fix it?
It just depends. It depends on the guests themselves, and it depends on how they connected. So we have some presets that we've created. So if they've connected and they're on a cell phone, I mean, cell phones are notorious, or any kind of phone, notorious for two things. One, it's going to have been compressed and sent through at such a low bit rate because of the way phone systems work that you've lost a lot of the frequencies that really flesh out the better qualities of our voices. And it's hard to get those back, but you can enhance some of those or try to pull up some of those frequencies that get lost. But more so than that, phone calls are notorious for just clipping and distorting on when people get loud, because we all speak at different. When we get excited, we speak louder, and if you're not running something like a compressor to push that down, well, then it gets clipped, and phones are notorious for that. So we've developed an EQ that will help isolate those often clipped frequencies so that there's more clarity in the voice and not as much distortion in those areas. But otherwise, we're just looking at trying to isolate the noise that's often with Skype, and then just trying to run some sort of multi-band compressor to, again, try to bring some of the richness back to the voice. And with Skype, you can sound great on Skype if you've got a good setup, like I do or you do.
Right.
We could connect via Skype and we would sound pretty good. Now there might be some of those Skype glitches where it kind of loses and
stretches
some of the packets and stuff. Yeah, and so a lot of times though the info is there, it just added in some extra space, and so you can get rid of that extra space and still make the word sound like it's supposed to, or at least get pretty close.
Yeah, editing those VoIP glitches is a skill. I've gotten pretty good at that, but it's really annoying because you can't save them all. I mean, you can't. Some of them you can help, you can make it better, but you can't get rid of it. I want to ask you, when you're editing, do you listen back real time, or can you speed up playback to like 1.5 times or 1.7 times and kind of listen, so it makes it sound like chipmunks when you're listening back, but it was just faster?
Yeah, a little bit of both. If it's a brand new client, it's one-to-one. We're listening in real time, and we're developing the template that we're going to be using for down the road with them. And then the first few times that we're editing them, we're probably still doing it one-to-one. If they have a guest that is particularly for lack of a better phrase, then if I throw out an we're going to do it in one-to-one because we want to make sure that we're catching all of those. But for my own podcast or for clients that I've been working with for a long time, or usually with every episode, I'll start out at one. And maybe once we get 10 minutes into it and I get a feel for how both of them are going to go, what to look for, because you can see what an looks like, or you can identify things visually, then we might speed it up to 1.5, 1.7. My own stuff, I can do it 2. And some of my other clients I can that I've been working with for 2 or 3 years, I can do it 2. But most of the time, it's 1.5.
I just started doing this like a month ago. Started speeding up the playbacks because I have a client who wants to record. They want to put out a show every week at a certain time, and they want to record the last segment like a few hours before they want to publish it. So that's the deal. I have to be on the, record them and then get it, finalize it, edit it, master it, everything, and give it to them to literally publish almost immediately. And so with them, I started listening back faster than the one-to-one. And this may sound weird, but when I listen back at like 1.5, it's pretty good. I can listen back at 1.73 to 1.
Yeah.
And that's fine. It's pretty fast for me, but it's fine. But if I notch it up to 1.79, it seems too fast for me.
Yeah.
Is that weird or what?
No, I think there's that threshold. And that's one of the things I actually prefer about Audacity. It allows you to fine tune, like you just said, 1.7 versus 1.79. Audacity also allows you to get that fine tuned with your playback speed. And Audition doesn't. You're at 1, 1.5, 2. So it's taking 0.5 increments. And 2 is pretty fast. It's got to be me. I have to. And, if it's one I recorded, I know what I said.
Yes.
And I'll remember it as I'm listening to it. So that allows me to listen to it at 2. But there aren't really. It's very, very rare that I can listen to a client that fast. But the 1.5 is pretty good. 1.7 is. I can do that too. But yeah, no, you're right. There's a threshold there where it just starts getting too muddied, and you can't distinguish all the little nuances, which you need to be able to do if you're editing properly.
Yeah, I have a friend, Ralph Rivera. By the way, Barry, you remember Ralph Rivera has a show called the Web Search Social Podcast, and you just listened to his show for the first time, Barry. What did you think about it?
There's no activity, no giggle, no nothing.
No, come on, Barry. Why are you being so hard?
We always kill Ralph. No, Ralph Rivera. He's a dear friend. But Ralph, I remember he told me he listens to podcasts at a faster speed. Like,
sure.
He told me now these days he cannot listen to just a podcast in real time, like 1-to-1. He can't do it. He needs to speed it up.
It's so funny because if you ever go to, you and I were at PodFest, at Podcast Movement, same thing. I will always hear a conversation where somebody will go, I'm not sure if I'm going to recognize people's voices because I listen to them at 1.5 speed. What do they really sound like? I'll be thinking, would you talk faster already? It's really funny to hear those other podcasters' voices when you meet them in person.
That is so funny. That's so true.
Yeah.
I just had an experience, interesting, with the woman who's managing the Forbes podcast network, who I'm working very closely with. And she actually hosts the show called Two Inboxes. Her name is Molly. And I met her on the phone. I talked with her on the phone for, a month and a half, maybe almost 2 months. And then we connected to do her sound check and to record her episode 1. And I finally got to hear her voice, in the full audio spectrum. And it was different. It was, it's like, it just was really nice and smooth. I could really hear the bass in her voice. I mean, not that it's a bassy voice, but the low frequencies, and it just sounded so full and nice. It's weird how that happens. It's just a contrast. So that's a good way to edit a little quicker when you can, like you said, for guys like you and me who do editing, this is one of the things we do for a living. You obviously have to be careful and know exactly what you're hearing and that kind of thing.
Right.
So any other tricks or tips that you've kind of gotten over the years to help you with your production and maybe to speed things up or just to get a better quality in general?
As far as speeding things up, there's two ways to speed things up. One is on before you ever hit the record button. And so working with clients in our case, but even taking these same principles personally, know what you're going to talk about before you hit that record button. Be comfortable with silence, because silence is easier to edit out than an is and faster. So be comfortable with silence. And if you're an ummer or you're not familiar or comfortable rather with silence, then join a local Toastmaster group and they will help you with that. That's one of the things that they're designed to do, and they're fantastic. So I just kind of being prepared before you hit the button to record. On the back end, I mentioned keyboard shortcuts earlier, but if you're editing audio and you're not using keyboard shortcuts, you're really doing yourself a disservice. What I have done is I have moved all of my primary keyboard shortcuts that I use to my left-hand side of my keyboard. So I've changed the default keyboard shortcut to a single key on my left-hand side of the keyboard. And I mean, even if I cut, copy, and paste, those are not Command or Control-C for copy. It's just C. One stroke, one keystroke. And that saves you a little bit of time. And it's like putting pennies in a jar. When you were a kid and your parents put pennies in a jar, and then over the summer you'd go to Six Flags or something with those pennies. That's what you're doing, is you're saving pennies every time you cut a keystroke out. So if you move all your keyboard shortcuts to your non-dominant hand, I'm right-handed, so I'm moving to the left-hand side of my keyboard. I can keep my right hand, which is using my pointing device. I use a magic mouse. And so I can leave my hand mouse on my mouse, my keyboard hand on my keyboard, and I'm looking at the audio because you can visually see things as they appear on the screen before you actually hear them. And so everything is kind of in sync that way. And you'll be amazed at how much time you can save. I've had people tell me after kind of going through that coaching session that I'll do with people where I have some training on that. Wow, it saved me 30% of my time. That's a big number. If you think about how long it takes you to edit your podcast, okay, now figure out what 30% of that is, and your mind's going to be blown. Oh my gosh, it just saved an hour,
Yeah.
If it's taking you multiple hours, if it takes you 3 hours to edit your podcast and you just shave off a third of that, that's a big deal. And for most people, it takes them 2 to 4 times, sometimes even 6 times the length of their show to edit their show. So if they have a 1-hour podcast, it might take them 3, 4, 5, 6 hours to edit their podcast. What if you could shave that time off by a third? That's a significant savings. So
it's huge.
Yeah.
Over time. Yeah, it's just great. So Darrell, this has been awesome. Thanks for all your insights. And again, you're speaking at Podcast Movement with me in July. Hope you all who are listening can come and meet us. And the website where people can find all your shows is goldenspiralmedia.com, right?
That's right.
And it's a whole network of shows. You have about 24 podcasts, and you also have Pro Podcast Solutions. What's the website for that?
ProPodcastSolutions.com.
See, I serve it up. Barry, do I ask easy questions?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So that's all that. So Darrell, thanks for being on the Podcast Engineering Show. Maybe we can have you back sometime, because I did want to talk to you about other things and, maybe some other equipment or some other on-location recording, or even recording into iPads and stuff. A lot of people are doing that these days. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So anyway, thanks, man, for coming on the show.
My pleasure. It's a whole lot of fun geeking out with you today. And if you ever want to invite me back, it would be my pleasure.
Yeah, that's awesome. So thanks, everybody, for listening. We'll end with the song that we always end with. This is the Podcast Engineering Show. I am Chris Curran. You can find more episodes of this show and a lot more on podcastengineeringschool.com. That's the school that I'm starting. It's going to take a while to get going, but thanks so much for listening. I know you got a lot from this conversation, so thanks again to Darrell. And in the meantime, I hope you can implement some of this stuff and improve your sound and improve the speed of your production. So Until next time, sound great.
Walk away from me where you can play that part so well. Why do you play it out on me now? You like to lose control where it's quite a feeling, isn't it? They're floating, drifting down now. You tell me that you found something better. How should I respond to that? It's a lie. I don't wanna hear it. What do you want me to say? It's a lie. I don't wanna hear it. You react some empathy. You change your attitude where you say I just don't get it now. You say your eyes so far away now. Gave up on me where some change your game and gave away. You say I wouldn't understand now. You tell me that you found something better. How should I respond to that? Oh yeah, I say now it's a lie. I don't wanna hear it. What do you want me to say? It's a lie. I don't wanna hear it. You react so angry. I want you to know you were ever with me through. I've gone over all we've been through. Doesn't seem that long a time now. Things we did still hold that meaning. And does it mean it's still the same? You're pushing me away. You worked your theories now where you're getting worked up on your now. You work your way around somehow now. And yes, it hurts me now where that you don't talk to me at all. Now that these words have slid